The Victoria Cross is the highest and most prestigious award and honour given out to members of the British Armed Forces. It has also been awarded to members of the Commonwealth nations, and during the Second World War, there was an Australian recipient who gained it for his involvement in the Air Force. William Ellis Newton, commonly known as Bill, was a bomber pilot who was noted for his skill and excellence within the military, but he was killed in barbaric fashion. He was eventually captured by the Japanese and was executed in horrific scenes. He was an experienced pilot during the Second World War, and he remained the only Australian airman to receive the Victoria Cross for his actions in the Southwest Pacific Theatre of the conflict. So join us today as we look at the horrific execution of Bill Newton, and remember to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Bill Newton was born in St Kilda on the 8th of June 1919, and he was the youngest child of his family. It's assumed that his early life was relatively normal, and he studied at the Melbourne Grammar School in 1929, but later switched schools as the Great Depression impacted the wealth his family had. They could not afford the school, so Bill attended a local state school. When he was 15, he did return to the grammar school, but then his father died of a heart attack. To support his family, Bill worked in a silk warehouse, but he was noted to have been a very skilled young man. Whilst at school, he was a model sportsman, was a very skilled cricketer, rubbing shoulders with Keith Miller, a man regarded as Australia's greatest ever all-round cricketer. Bill and Keith were friends, and Newton played cricket regularly in his local teams, and even gained selection in county teams. He continued to work inside of the warehouse, but in 1938 joined the Citizens Military Force, as he had already also been in the Cadet Corps when he was at school. He served as a private in the machine gun detachments of the Royal Melbourne Regiments. As the Second World War broke out in September 1939, following Hitler's invasion of Poland, Australia stood with Britain in the fight against Nazi Germany. Bill Newton resigned from his job and joined the Royal Australian Air Force in February 1940, dreaming of becoming a pilot. He tried to enlist at a younger age in the Air Force before the war, but his mother refused to sign the papers, but as Australia were at war, she gave in and signed them. Bill's brothers also enlisted in the forces, and he began to train with the No. 1 Elementary Flying Training School. He learned flying tiger moths and was noted to have been rather gifted, as within a few months of signing up, he was given his wings and was commissioned as a pilot officer. He undertook further training and then became a flight instructor, as he was also a gifted teacher. It seemed like Bill Newton had the world at his feet. He was a very gifted person who was skilled in many different things. He completed further training in the Australian Air Force, but found teaching others to have been a waste of his time, as he wished greatly to take the fight to the enemy and to join the war in a combat capacity. The work he was doing was rewarding, but he wanted to go on combat missions and take the fight to the Nazis or the Japanese. He rose to the rank of flight lieutenant in April 1942 and began to train as a navigator on board of the Lockheed Hudson light bomber aircraft. Hudsons were used in a variety of Allied air forces, including the RAF and the United States Air Force, as well as by Australians, and they were used for a variety of different missions, from carrying out anti-submarine warfare to bombing transport ships in the Pacific. Newton was posted to the 22nd Squadron, based in New South Wales, who had just begun to convert to using Douglas Boston aircraft, and whilst there, Newton was described as a big, brash, likeable man who could drink anyone under the table, a good pilot, good at sports, and he had a way with the girls. It was during his time with this squadron that Newton got the combat missions he wanted, entering the fight against the Japanese. They were involved in escorting convoys and in patrolling the sea around Sydney for submarines at the time. Bill Newton began his first combat operation on the 1st of January 1943, and he would complete 52 of these. The following month he completed missions in monsoon conditions and attacked the Japanese in mountainous terrain, dropping bombs from his aircraft. He was involved in the Battle of the Bismarck Sea and bombed airfields to prevent enemy fighter aircraft taking off there. Throughout his early combat missions, Newton was known for being direct in attacking his targets. He would not make evasive actions, but instead went straight for the targets, dropping bombs, and because of this he was known as a firebug. The Japanese also began to nickname Newton as Blue Cap, as during his bombing campaign he wore his old cap from his days playing cricket. Newton was in a significant position inside of the Air Force, and on the 16th of March 1943, he led an attack on the Salamaua Isthmus against the Japanese. It had been taken by the Japanese, and during a sortie, Newton's Boston aircraft was hit by anti-aircraft fire. This caused significant damage to the wings, fuel tank, undercarriage and fuselage. However, Bill Newton continued with his attack and dropped the bombs on a number of buildings, fuel stores and ammunition dumps, wreaking havoc in the area. Newton's reputation for being the firebug continued, as he even passed around again for another run dumping bombs on the enemy, but when he got back to base, his aircraft had 98 bullet holes inside of it and it was barely functioning. It was this sort of fighting that Newton loved, and 2 days later, he along with 2 crew members went back to Salamaua with a sortie of 5 more Boston aircraft. As Newton approached the target, he went to drop his bombs, but as he did, his aircraft caught fire and burst into flames after being hit by anti-aircraft fire from the ground. Newton struggled with his Douglas Boston, but it was no use. He tried to keep the aircraft in the sky as long as he possibly could to guide him away from the enemy lines, and he ditched the aircraft in the sea around 900 metres from the shoreline. The forced landing was rough and it killed Newton's navigator, but he and his wireless operator managed to survive and both of them swam ashore. A number of the aircraft in the sortie circled around for a while, and one went to report to headquarters what happened, whilst the rest had to go and refuel. Newton and Flight Sergeant John Leon managed to swim to the coast, and they were looking to hopefully link up with the natives, but were captured by a Japanese patrol. They were taken for a high-level interrogation, and Newton, who gained a reputation for his bombing attacks and raids, was known to local Japanese soldiers. The Japanese treated captured airmen particularly bad, especially those in bombing aircrafts that had caused much devastation through their bombing attacks on the area. It's believed that the 2 were tortured and interrogated, with their torture being particularly brutal. Many captured airmen wished that they'd in fact died rather than face the horrific treatment at the hands of the Japanese. The 2 men were taken to Salamaua, the very place where they had devastated with their bombs, and were interrogated for 4 days until their executions were ordered. Flight Sergeant John Leon, under the orders of Rear Admiral Ruritaro Fujita, was executed in barbaric fashion. Leon and Newton had been split up. Leon was taken to the perimeter of the Lae airfield, and he was made to dig his own grave. Whilst this was happening, he was then bayoneted to death by soldiers. Newton was considered a person of importance and someone who possessed a considerable rank, and he was also sentenced to death, but was executed also in barbaric fashion. A newspaper article reported of his death that on March 29th, 1943, Newton was given his last drink of water before being driven from the base guardhouse to a place of execution on the edge of a water-filled bomb crater. He was brought here along with many other guards who were there to watch the proceedings. A diary entry told of his final moments. It said, "He is apparently resigned. The precaution is taken of surrounding him with guards with fixed bayonets, but he remains calm." If the executioner did not take his life, then there were dozens of Japanese soldiers who were ready to step in to do so. Newton was then ordered to kneel down in front of the soldiers. From the group stepped out Sub-Lieutenant Uchi Komai, the naval officer who had captured Newton. He was given a commander's sword, and then he approached Bill Newton, who was still kneeling. It was said that Newton remains calm, facing his death in such a brutal way. He stretched out his neck, and he was noted to have been very brave. It was then said, "The unit commander has drawn his favourite sword. It glitters in the light, and sends a cold shiver down my spine. First he touches the prisoner's neck lightly with the sword, then raises it overhead. The prisoner closes his eyes for a second, and at once the sword sweeps down." Bill Newton was beheaded by sword in front of a large crowd of Japanese soldiers in horrific scenes. 5 days after the report emerged to the public, a headless corpse wearing Australian patterned service trousers and shirt was recovered from a bomb crater around 20 feet from the shoreline. Bill Newton was then awarded the Victoria Cross for his actions when he bombed Salamaua Island, and his body was reinterred in a war cemetery. His grave marker states, "For God, my King, my country." There was confusion with regards to a famous photograph between the execution of Bill Newton and an Australian commando, Len Siflete. He was killed by katana and beheaded, but there were no images of Bill Newton's execution. He was an incredibly gifted airman who was well liked by fellow members of the Air Force. Newton wished to see combat inside of the Second World War, but met his end in a horrific spectacle, but allegedly met it with bravery and calm. His execution was one which was tragic and sadistic, and the Victoria Cross he was awarded still does not do justice for his loss. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.